During the very first week of my so-called retirement, my own son leaned forward across the kitchen table, locked eyes with me, and without a shred of hesitation spat out the words, "We don't need another mouth to feed in this house." For a second I thought I'd misheard him. My ears rang, my chest went tight. But no, he meant every syllable. It was like being punched in the gut by the same hands I'd once held steady when he took his first steps. And then, as if the insult wasn't enough, Ryan kept going. He claimed he'd done me a favor by lining up a janitor job for me at Bennett Industries, the same company where he strutted around as a mid-level manager. A favor, the kind you give a beggar so they stop bothering you. I stared at him, and every instinct in me screamed to slam my fist on the table, but I didn't. Instead, I smiled a thin, practiced mask because I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of seeing me bleed. Inside, a cold, sharp fury was blooming. He thought he'd humiliated me. He thought I'd obediently shuffle along, head down, grateful for whatever scraps he threw my way. "Honest work is honest work," I said evenly, tasting the bitterness of each word as it left my mouth. Amanda, my daughter-in-law, didn't even glance at me. She just sipped her coffee and nodded toward Ryan, her expression smug as if she'd just witnessed an act of noble charity. In that moment, I saw it all clearly. To them, I wasn't a father or family. I was a burden, a line item on their grocery bill, something to manage and contain. I said I'd take the job. Ryan's face softened into self-satisfaction. Amanda's lips curved in quiet triumph. Neither of them noticed my eyes harden, the mental gears clicking into place, the silent vow taking root. They thought they'd stripped me of dignity. What they didn't realize was this. I'm the man who once clawed his way out of nothing and built an empire with my bare hands. I know patience. I know how to wait. And I know exactly how to end a game before my opponent even realizes it's begun. This wasn't defeat. This was the first move. And when the last scene came, they wouldn't just see me standing, they'd see me standing above them. If this story touched your heart, press 1 inch the comments. If you think it could have been handled differently, press 2. And I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from. Seattle in early spring has a way of feeling both alive and gray streets humming with movement, yet every color muted under a sky that never quite clears. From the small upstairs window in my cramped bedroom, I watched the ferries cut across the sound, commuters hunching against the drizzle. 20 years I'd called this city home, but lately the house I stood in felt less like home and more like a guest room I'd overstayed. When my wife passed, Ryan insisted I move in for convenience. I'd sold my own house 3 bedrooms, a perfect lawn I'd kept immaculate, mortgage paid off years ago, and handed most of the proceeds to him to help with the family. It was framed as compassion. In reality, it was a transaction. Now, I lived in a narrow back room of his 2-story home, furnished with a single bed, a worn dresser, and a nightstand stacked with paperbacks whose pages curled from years of use. I kept my life simple. Always had. Clothes pressed but modest. Meals cooked for myself when possible. Walks to the corner store instead of driving. To Ryan and Amanda, this was proof I was scraping by living small because I had no other choice. They were wrong. The less they knew about my resources, the better. Ryan, he loved to look the part. At 38, he wore pressed shirts and carried himself like the hero of his own success story, speaking with a booming confidence that masked how little substance was behind it. He'd carved out a managerial position at Bennett Industries, a company that sounded prestigious enough to impress strangers. What he never realized was that I had been there long before him, not on the payroll, but at the foundation. Amanda, 36, was the kind of woman whose smile could pass for warmth if you didn't look too closely. Office manager at Coleman and Partners Accounting, efficient, polished, always ready with the polite nod. But her gaze told the truth. It lingered on watches, handbags, and cars, like they were worth more than the people wearing them. The 3 of us shared dinners on occasion. Shared. Being generous, they talked among themselves, pushed their plates aside, drifted into the living room, and left me to clear and wash the dishes. When they did address me, it was usually to suggest how I could be more productive, as if my life needed their management. They never once asked about the years before Ryan was born, before the comfortable mortgage and steady paychecks. They didn't remember that I worked double shifts at the shipyard to pay for his private high school, or that I took weekend jobs to cover his University of Washington tuition. They didn't know I added $40,000 to their wedding budget so Amanda could have the venue she had to have. And they absolutely had no idea about Charles Bennett, my oldest friend, my business partner, the man whose garage became the birthplace of Bennett Industries 25 years ago. We started with nothing but a shared vision and my $500,000 investment. Charles ran the day-to-day, while I stayed in the shadows, letting my shares quietly gain value until they were worth more than Ryan's imagination could stretch. To Ryan, Bennett Industries was his employer. To me, it was a monument to risk, loyalty, and the grit it takes to turn nothing into an empire. So when my son offered me a janitor's job there, thinking he was doing me some grand favor, it wasn't just insulting, it was poetic. He'd unknowingly placed me in the perfect position to teach him a lesson about humility. He thought he'd box me in. What he didn't see was the trap I'd just decided to set. And I would play this opportunity to its final, devastating note, right under his nose. It happened 3 nights later. The rain came down hard, hammering the roof like 1,000 impatient fists demanding to be let in. I'd gone to bed early not because I was tired, but because there was nothing worth staying up for in that house. I lay there staring at the ceiling, counting the creaks and groans of the old wood, when their voices cut through the steady drum of rain. At first it was just the low murmur of conversation, muffled through the thin wall. But then Ryan's voice rose, sharp and unmistakable. "He's not going to keep sitting around here," he said. "If he won't work, we'll use his pension and put him in a nursing home." I froze. My pulse kicked hard in my ears. Amanda's voice slid in right after, smooth and clipped, like she was discussing a spreadsheet instead of a man's life. "We should give him a deadline. 1 week to find a job, or he's out. My dad's neighbor works until 73. Henry's only 65. He can mop floors, stock shelves, whatever. He's not an invalid." Ryan chuckled low, smug, and rotten. "Yeah, well, if he complains, we'll just remind him beggars can't be choosers." Their laughter followed, light and unhurried, the kind of laughter people share when they think the person they're mocking will never hear them. I stared at the ceiling, my hands curling into fists beneath the blanket. In that moment, every sacrifice I'd ever made for Ryan came roaring back, not as fond recollection, but as a ledger of debts unpaid. The nights I went hungry so he could have the best cleats on his baseball team. The weekends I gave up so he could go on school trips. The years of double shifts at the shipyard to pay for his tuition when the university decided to squeeze us harder. And the biggest sacrifice of all, writing that $500,000 check to my old friend Charles Bennett 25 years ago, back when all he had was a dream and a dusty garage. That faith became Bennett Industries, now worth hundreds of millions. Ryan strutted around its offices like he belonged there, never realizing he was standing on a foundation I had helped build with my own money. To them, I was just a quiet old man living off fumes. I could have stormed into their room right then, told them exactly who they were dealing with, watched the smug drain from their faces. But the thing about playing for keeps is knowing when to keep the knife sheathed. So I listened. Amanda's voice took on a scheming edge. She spoke of future plans and how freeing up money would finally let them remodel the kitchen. Ryan agreed, adding without hesitation that once I was tucked away in a nursing home, they could rent out my room for a little extra income. My room, the same one I'd paid for when I helped them buy this house with a down payment they couldn't have scraped together in 10 years. It was almost funny, how blind they were. They thought I was a burden. They didn't realize I was the one holding the one weapon they couldn't defend against, the ability to dismantle their comfort brick by brick until nothing was left but regret. I lay there for hours after their voices faded, the rain still tapping at the glass like a metronome for my thoughts. My mind had moved past the insult. Now it was fixed on the how. How to turn their greed into the rope they'd hang themselves with. How to make the lesson burn deep enough that they'd never forget it. By dawn, I had my opening move. Step 1. Take the janitor job. Let Ryan believe he'd broken me, that I'd fallen into line like some obedient dependent. Let him feel smug. The higher the perch, the farther the fall. Step 2. Watch. Wait. Amanda liked to think she was the clever one, but people who underestimate their prey always leave threads dangling. I only needed one to start pulling. I got out of bed and moved silently through the house. Ryan's office door was ajar, the faint blue glow of his work laptop casting shadows across the desk. I didn't touch it yet. but I noted its place. Where work lived, so did paperwork. Patience. The best traps aren't sprung early. That morning over coffee, Ryan outlined the janitor position in a tone that made it sound like he was offering me a crown. Minimum wage, early hours, a great way for you to contribute. Amanda's smile was polished and poisonous, the kind people wear when they're humoring someone they think is beneath them. I smiled back. Inside, the first domino had already tipped. The opportunity came on a gray Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day when the whole city felt like it was holding its breath. Amanda sat at the kitchen table, fingers flying over her laptop keys, a half-empty mug of coffee abandoned at her side. I stepped in to rinse a plate, minding my own business, or at least looking like I was, when I noticed a neat stack of papers fanned out near her elbow. Coleman and Partners accounting letterhead. Expense reports. Amanda's phone rang. She answered, voice bright and fake, and then slipped into the hallway, closing the door behind her. The papers were right there, close enough for me to read the headings. And that was when instinct kicked in. Decades of running budgets, scrutinizing contracts, and sniffing out bad numbers had trained me well. Numbers always told the truth if you knew how to listen. The first sheet made me pause. Office supplies, $847.50 for 1 month. My eyebrows twitched. I'd seen bloated numbers before, but that was a banquet-sized serving of paper clips and post-it notes. I slid the page aside. Another report. Equipment maintenance, $1,234 for a month, when the actual vendor receipt tucked neatly behind showed $734. Not a typo, not a one-off. This was surgical. Clean, consistent inflation. Always in round numbers, the kind that skim under the radar of anyone lazy enough not to look twice. I didn't touch a thing I couldn't put back exactly where it was. I didn't need to. My phone was in my pocket. 3 quick snaps of the first page, 2 of the next. Front, back, flip, snap. Snap. By the time Amanda's muffled laughter drifted back from the hallway, I had enough to light the fuse. That night I called David Foster, an old friend from my consulting days. Now he was a forensic accountant with a knack for following money like a bloodhound on a fresh scent. He owed me more than a few favors, and I intended to collect. David, I said, I need you to dig into Coleman and Partners' actual office expenses for the past 6 months, and I need it done quiet. Oh. 3 days later, my phone buzzed. Henry, David said, your daughter-in-law's been skimming. Inflated invoices, phantom vendors, 18 grand so far. She's good, but not good enough. I thanked him, hung up, and got to work. I created a brand new email account, one that couldn't be traced to me even if Amanda's life depended on it. Over the next week, I assembled my evidence. Every doctored report paired with the authentic vendor receipts David had pulled. Discrepancies highlighted in red, each annotation leaving 0 room for error as an excuse. The file grew until it was a weapon 28 attachments, each one a nail in her professional coffin. But you don't swing a hammer just because you've got one. You wait until the frame is up and the target's head is perfectly in line. I wouldn't send it yet. The timing had to be exquisite. I wanted Amanda and Ryan reeling from another hit before this one dropped. A 1-2 punch they wouldn't see coming. That other hit would come from inside Bennett Industries, Ryan's precious fortress. I'd take the janitor job he'd so graciously offered, wear the mask of the compliant, grateful father, and then find the perfect way to pull the rug out from under him in front of the only man whose approval actually mattered, Charles Bennett himself. Poetic. That's what it was. Ryan thought he was teaching me humility by marching me into the very company I helped build from the ground up. In truth, he was escorting me straight to the stage where I'd script his public unraveling. At dinner that Friday, Ryan beamed as he announced, "Your first shift's Monday, 7 sharp," Amanda added with a little smirk. "Try not to be late. Charles Bennett's a stickler for punctuality." I nearly laughed into my mashed potatoes. She didn't know Charles and I had been friends since before she could parallel park. "Don't worry," I said, smiling like the docile old man they wanted me to be. "I'll be there." Inside, I wasn't counting the days anymore. I was counting the hours. Monday morning broke crisp and deceptively bright, the kind of Seattle morning that tries to convince you the rain won't be back by lunch. Ryan stood in the kitchen like a petty tyrant, coffee mug in hand, watching me over the rim as if making sure I didn't somehow fail the simple act of showing up. 7 sharp, he said for the third time, each repetition laced with the condescension of a man who thought he was in control. I nodded, adjusted the collar of the plain work shirt he'd bought me cheap fabric, stiff from the packaging, and gave him a cheery thumbs up. On the surface, I was the picture of compliance. Inside, I was already savoring the first fracture I planned to put in his perfect little world. At 7:30, I was still at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and reading the paper. The phone lit up with Ryan's number 3 calls before I answered. My voice mild. "Dad, where the hell are you? Charles is expecting you." "Oh," I said, letting just enough confusion slip into my tone. "Was it 7:30? Must have mixed it up. Old brain, you know." "This isn't funny." His voice had gone sharp, tinged with panic. "I vouched for you. Now I look like an idiot in front of my boss." "Perfect." I apologized with the right amount of sheepishness, promised to be there tomorrow, and hung up. The first crack in his confidence had appeared, and I hadn't even left the house. That afternoon, while Ryan simmered at work, I sat at my desk with the anonymous email account open. One final check of the attachments. Inflated expense reports, the authentic receipts David had dug up, side-by-side comparisons so damning they read like a confession. A clear chronological trail of theft, airtight. The message to Richard Coleman was short and lethal. "Dear Mr. Coleman, I am writing to inform you of serious financial discrepancies in your accounting department. Your employee, Amanda Walker, has been systematically embezzling funds by inflating invoices and creating fictitious vendor accounts. Attached is documented proof. A concerned party." I hovered over the send button not because I was hesitating, but because I wanted to enjoy the moment. Then I clicked. By late afternoon, Amanda came home pale, her posture rigid, eyes darting anywhere but toward me. She went straight upstairs. Ryan followed minutes later. Behind their closed door, his voice was low, clipped, frantic. I didn't need to eavesdrop. Coleman would have confronted her immediately. Suspension was inevitable. Criminal charges were on the table. At dinner, Ryan's small talk was limp, his mind clearly somewhere else. Amanda picked at her plate like the food was sawdust. I smiled politely, asking harmless questions, feigning ignorance. "Ready for tomorrow?" Ryan asked finally, trying for authority, but sounding more like a man clinging to whatever control he thought he had left. "I am," I said evenly, and I meant it. The next morning, Ryan personally chauffeured me to Bennett Industries, filling the drive with warnings about following his lead and not embarrassing him. I nodded in all the right places. Inside, the marble-floored lobby bustled with employees. Ryan marched me to the supply closet, handed me a mop and bucket like he was issuing a weapon. "Make it look authentic when Charles sees you," he ordered, puffing his chest like a rooster. I took the mop without a word. Most people barely glanced our way. Just another janitor and a mid-level manager until Charles Bennett appeared at the far end of the hall. Silver hair gleaming under the lights, eyes on his tablet until they lifted and landed on me. He stopped walking. Ryan, oblivious, beamed. "Mr. Bennett, perfect timing. I solved our staffing problem and helped my family. This is my father, the new janitor." Charles's eyes flicked from Ryan to me, and I saw the recognition hit like a strike of lightning. Then his expression shifted cool, sharp, cutting. "Ryan," he said slowly, "do you have any idea what you've just done?" Ryan's smile wavered. "Sir? You brought Henry Walker, one of the largest shareholders in this company, into my building with a mop in his hands. And you're proud of it?" The blood drained from Ryan's face so fast it was almost comical. Conversations in the lobby stilled, the silence sharpening the humiliation. "Let's take this to my office," Charles said, his voice ironclad. I leaned the mop against the wall, my movements unhurried. The real performance was just about to begin. Charles's executive office on the 22nd floor was the kind of room that swallowed you whole if you didn't belong there. Rich mahogany desk polished to a mirror sheen, floor-to-ceiling windows casting the Seattle skyline in sharp relief, and along the walls, framed photographs marking the company's milestones. I was in more than a few of those photos, standing shoulder to shoulder with Charles Bennett at ribbon cuttings, product launches, and shareholder meetings. Ryan had walked past them for years and never once noticed. Charles gestured toward the same deep leather chair where I'd once sat to negotiate million-dollar contracts and plot the company's future. I lowered myself into it with the ease of someone who'd earned the right to be there. Ryan hovered at the door, stiff and pale, as if sheer stillness could keep him from being dragged into the storm gathering over his head. "Now," Charles began, folding his hands on the desk, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "Someone explained to me why my business partner was just introduced to me as a janitor by his own son." Ryan blinked, his face a blank canvas of confusion and dawning dread. "Business partner? No, there's been a mistake. My dad, he's just retired." "I am retired," I said evenly. "From the day-to-day grind, anyway." Charles' eyes never left Ryan. "Your father owns 37% of Bennett Industries. He invested $500,000 before you were even born. Without him, there is no Bennett Industries. And without Bennett Industries," he let the silence hang, heavy as an anvil, "there is no cushy job for you to lose, which, incidentally, you just did." Ryan's knees gave out and he fell into the nearest chair, shoulders slumped. I didn't know." "You didn't care to know," I said, my voice harder now. "You looked at my modest life and saw weakness. You decided you had the right to dictate how I lived. And when you thought I no longer served your convenience, you planned to throw me into a nursing home." Charles's tone went steel cold. "Henry Walker has done more for this company and for you than you can comprehend. The arrogance you've shown is staggering. Clear out your office. Security will escort you out." Ryan's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came. It was like watching a man drown in air. Charles turned to me. "Henry, do you want me to take any other action?" I shook my head. "The rest is already in motion." Ryan's head snapped toward me. "What does that mean?" "Ask Amanda," I said, rising from the chair. Right on cue, his phone buzzed. He answered, and Amanda's panicked voice poured through, loud enough for us both to hear. "Ryan, they've suspended me. Coleman has everything, the reports, the invoices. They're saying I stole company money. Someone's been tracking me for months." Her voice cracked into sobs, tumbling over itself in panic. Ryan's eyes darted between me and the window, comprehension hitting like a sledgehammer. What did you do?" he whispered, his voice trembling. I met his gaze without flinching. "I did what you never learned to do. I protected what mattered. And I made sure you'd remember the price of disrespect for the rest of your life." Charles stood, signaling the meeting's end. "Henry, my friend, my door is always open to you. Ryan, don't come back." As Charles and I left the office side by side, the contrast couldn't have been sharper, me walking tall, Ryan trailing behind like a man who'd watched his entire life collapse in real time. In the elevator, Ryan finally spoke, his voice small. "You've ruined us." "Oh, no," I said, quiet but unyielding. "You ruined yourself the moment you forgot that respect is worth more than money." The doors slid open to the hum of the lobby. For everyone else, it was business as usual. For me, the real business was almost finished. Only one final act remained, waiting for me at home. The drive back to the house was suffocating. Ryan gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Knuckles bone white, his jaw working furiously as if he were grinding each unspoken word into dust. The rain had returned in sheets, streaking the windshield in uneven rivulets that warped the city outside into something strange and unrecognizable. When we finally pulled into the driveway, Amanda was waiting. She paced the living room like a caged animal, her normally polished hair puffed and frizzed from the damp air, mascara streaked down her cheeks. The moment I stepped through the door, she spun toward me, eyes blazing. "You did this," she spat, her voice breaking under the weight of rage and panic. "You set me up." I shrugged off my coat slowly, deliberately, hanging it on the rack as if I had all the time in the world. "I didn't make you falsify invoices, Amanda. That was entirely your decision." Her face went crimson, the kind of flush that comes when truth lands like a slap. "You've been spying on me?" "I've been protecting myself," I said evenly. 2 months ago, I heard you both plotting to take my pension and toss me in a nursing home. I decided to be ready when you followed through." Ryan moved closer, his fury barely leashed. "You could have come to us, talked to us. We're family." I met his gaze, letting the calm in my voice slice sharper than any shout. "Family doesn't scheme behind thin walls. Family doesn't laugh about turning a lifetime of sacrifice into a punchline." Amanda's voice trembled, but pushed forward. "You've ruined us. My job. Ryan's job." "No," I cut in, each word crisp and deliberate. You ruined yourselves the moment you decided I was disposable. I simply refused to let you hold the knife at my throat. Ryan's shoulders sagged, but he still clung to the illusion of moral ground. So this was just about revenge? This, I said, sweeping my hand around the room, was about teaching you the difference between living simply and being poor, about showing you what real power looks like and how quickly it evaporates when you abuse it. Amanda dropped onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Ryan stayed standing, but the fight had drained out of him, leaving only the hollow shape of defiance. I let the silence stretch before delivering the final blow. You've spent years thinking you were in control. You weren't. You never were. And now you'll live with the consequences without my help, without my money, and without my name to shield you. Amanda's head jerked up, eyes wide with something between shock and desperation. You wouldn't? I would, I said flatly. And I have. My will's been updated. Every cent will go to scholarships and charities. You'll get nothing. Ryan's mouth worked like he wanted to protest, but nothing came out. The irony, I continued, is that you could have had everything just by treating me with respect. Instead, you showed me exactly how dangerous it is to trust you with anything I value. For a long, heavy moment, the only sound in the room was the rain tapping against the windows. Then I stepped toward the door, slipping my coat back on. I'm moving out, I said, my tone final and cold. The house is yours to pay for. My belongings will be picked up tomorrow. Amanda's voice was small now, stripped of all bite. Where will you go? Wherever I want, I said. And for the first time in months, I felt the truth of it settle in my chest like solid ground. And without you, I'll actually enjoy it. Oh, I left them there, Amanda crumpled on the couch, Ryan staring at the floor like it might offer a way back. The door closed behind me with a quiet, decisive click that cut sharper than any slam. The rain had stopped by the time I reached my car. The wet pavement shimmered under the streetlights, turning the quiet suburban road into a glossy, empty stage. I sat there behind the wheel for a moment, hands resting lightly, letting the silence sink into my bones. It had been just 1 week since my so-called retirement began, 7 days, measured not in hours, but in insults, thinly veiled threats, and the kind of betrayal you don't forget. And yet, as I eased away from the house I had once helped Ryan buy, there was no bitterness, no lingering sting, only relief. I didn't go far. My first stop was the modest apartment I'd rented months ago, long before Ryan and Amanda ever suspected I might need it. It overlooked Elliott Bay, the kind of place that traded square footage for peace of mind. The landlord had kept his word. The keys were waiting under the mat. Inside, the air held the clean tang of fresh paint. Bare walls, minimal furniture. Nothing fancy, but everything mine. I unpacked a few essentials, clothes, books, the coffee mug I'd kept for decades, and brewed a fresh pot. Standing at the window, I watched the ferries cut slow lines across the water, their lights like steady stars against the dark. For the first time in years, the future was entirely my own. That evening the phone rang. Charles's voice came warm but direct. "Henry, you sure you're done? You've still got an open seat on the board." I smiled to myself. "I'm done. I have nothing left to prove, not to the company, and certainly not to them. Oh, we talked like old friends who had weathered too many storms to waste words." Before hanging up, Charles said, "Justice was served." "Yes," I told him. And so was the truth. The weeks rolled forward, each one quieter than the last. News trickled in. Amanda, facing formal charges for embezzlement, had traded her office heels for court dates. Ryan, scrambling for work at his old salary, learned quickly how small the professional world could be when your name carried the wrong kind of story. The house I'd once helped them buy turned from a trophy into a weight they could barely carry. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The lesson had been delivered cleanly, and its sting would last far longer than any speech I could have given. Whether they chose to learn from it, that was on them. People mistake wealth for what you can buy. They think it's about possessions, about stacking things high enough to be seen. But real wealth is the freedom to walk away, and the wisdom to know when it's time. For me, that time had come, and I intended to spend the rest of my days exactly as I pleased, answering to no one but myself.